Coming up on The World Today. Pakistan International Airlines passenger plane crashes in Karachi. Pro-democracy lawmakers protest warn of end of Hong Kong following China's move to impose new security law. Plus, Brazil's coronavirus death toll hits 20,000 as fears grow Latin America could become the pandemic's next epicenter. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. We begin in Pakistan, where an international airlines plane has crashed in Karachi on a flight from Lahore. Flight PK-8303, which was carrying around 91 passengers and 8 crew members, was flying from Lahore to Jinnah International Airport, one of Pakistan's busiest. Provincial health officials have confirmed at least 37 fatalities, but a far higher death toll is feared. At least 2 passengers survived.
Clouds of black smoke, roofs caved in and debris scattered in streets as ambulances rushed through chaotic crowds of people. This is the aftermath of a passenger plane crash in a residential area in the Pakistani city of Karachi, with at least 100 people on board. Many are feared dead. Flight PK-8303 took off from Lahore and was due to land at 2:30 p.m. local time in Karachi, but went missing from the radar. Officials say the pilot of the Airbus A320 airliner made a mayday call saying he was experiencing technical problems. Pakistan's army sent helicopters to assess the damage and rescue efforts, while urban search and rescue teams have been deployed on the ground. The disaster comes as Pakistanis across the country are preparing to celebrate the end of Ramadan and the beginning of Eid al-Fitr, with many travelling back to their homes in cities and villages. Pakistan resumed limited domestic commercial flights last week after a months-long suspension due to the coronavirus. Flights are operating with reduced capacity to ensure that passengers are sitting with one seat space between them in cabins. In 2016, a PIA commercial flight crashed in the northern Pakistani region of Chitra, killing all 47 people on board. PIA, one of the world's leading airlines until the 1970s, has in recent years experienced frequent cancellations, delays, and financial troubles.
VOA's Islamabad Bureau Chief Aisha Tanzim joins us now on The World Today to bring us up to speed on the situation. Aisha, what's the situation on ground currently?
Well, here it's 9:30 p.m., so it's very dark now, but the rescue operations are continuing despite the lack of light. As you said, so far 37 confirmed fatalities, although nobody can tell whether all of them are from the plane or whether some of them are from the local population, because the plane did crash in a populated area of Karachi, which is one of the most densely populated cities in the country. So what we know is the rescue operations are ongoing. The final death toll is not confirmed. There are at least 2 confirmed survivors from the airplane crash, which is some are calling that a miracle. So far, that's all we know, that rescue, and we have a lot of eyewitness testimony telling us about what might have happened in the last few moments before the plane crashed. So, for example, there are people telling us that the plane's engines, that there was the engines were on fire before the plane crashed. The people saying that the pilot seemed to be trying to avoid the populated area, trying to take the plane into a less populated space before it crashed. We've heard the pilot's audio who told the control tower his engines were gone. So a lot of little bits and pieces of information, kind of like a puzzle, that still need to be put together. The full picture is still not clear.
All right then, Aisha, what has Prime Minister Imran Khan said so far? You know, this is tragic. Just as, India started domestic flights again, this is happening. Seems that we have lost Aisha. Aisha, if you can hear me, I was asking
Good.
what...
But if you're asking...
Yeah, go on.
Asking me about airline safety, PIA has a bit of problem in the recent years. In the last 10 years, they've been, and not just PIA, Pakistani airlines in general. So in the last 10 years, there have been 4 crashes. Very few of them have had a complete investigation and a report out in the public, so everybody would know why the crash occurred. And along with those 4 crashes in the last 10 years, there have been a lot of near crashes. There have been a lot of misses, where the planes landed, but its, landing gear didn't open, but it landed and didn't crash. So there are a lot of safety concerns. There are a lot of questions about maintenance, whether this plane was properly maintained. We know that the plane was only 15 years, 9 months, so around 16 years old. So not an old plane, but was it being properly maintained? In addition, we also know that for the type of engine that this plane had, there were FAA, which is the American Civil Aviation Authority, their guidelines about updates to the engines that needed to be made. We do not know whether those updates were made for this engine. So a lot of questions about safety, a lot of questions about maintenance that are yet to be answered.
Yeah, Anisha, just before I let you go, there was a bit of confusion about the passengers on the plane, the amount of passengers on the plane. Well, officials are now saying that 91 passengers and about 8 crew members are said to have been on that plane. Do we know who these victims were and, what plans? Were they traveling maybe to celebrate Eid? Do we know any idea on who these victims were?
Well, we are still trying to determine whether all of these victims were just trying to travel home to meet their families for Eid, or whether they were just returning home because they were stuck in a place. Because as you know, in Pakistan, the intercity air travel was shut down due to COVID-19. It had just recently opened back up. So maybe some of these passengers were stuck in Lahore and surrounding areas and were trying to get back to their hometowns in Karachi or nearby. But definitely there must have been some passengers in there that were trying to spend Eid with their families. We have a list of passengers with the names. I mean, there's one name that's foreign sounding. I don't want to give out names on air, but we're trying to figure out if there were dual nationals, if there were foreigners, or whether all locals just trying to get back home.
All right, then, Aisha Tanzim, VOA's Islamabad Bureau Chief, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on that situation. I know it's going to be a very long night for you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, murdered Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi's fiancée says no one has the right to pardon his killers after his son said he forgave them. Hatis Cengiz, a Turkish citizen, tweeted that the heinous murder does not have a statute of limitations. Khashoggi, a critic of the Saudi government, was killed inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey in 2018. Saudi officials say this was a rogue operation not sanctioned by the state. This account has been doubted globally. Among those questioning the official Saudi line were some intelligence agencies and the United Nations. Khashoggi had been writing for the Washington Post newspaper and living in the United States before his death. Now, Hong Kong pro-democrats have staged a protest at the legislature following Beijing's move to impose a new security law on the city after last year's pro-democracy unrest. Legislative councillors surrounded the chairperson's seat and scuffled with security guards in an attempt to obstruct the meeting. A number of them were evicted from the conference room by security guards after ongoing scuffles. Pro-democracy lawmaker Dennis Kwok says Beijing's move would put an end to the city's long-upheld one country, two systems formulation and the rule of law. Details of the proposal were unveiled on Friday, a day after Beijing proposed the new controversial national security legislation that critics see as an historical turning point for China's freest city. The proposal, aimed at tackling secession, subversion, terrorism, and foreign interference, has sent jitters across the business and diplomatic communities. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has condemned China's plan to impose the new security law in Hong Kong, calling it a death knell for the city's freedom.
One of the central principles of the rule of law is that everyone is equal. No one is above the law. Not even the chief executive is above the law. Are they saying that there will be a commission or an organization in Hong Kong that is above the law? Then that will be the end of Hong Kong.
Well, Wilson Leung, a legal practitioner, joins us now from Hong Kong. Wilson, thank you so much for joining us on The Well today.
Thank you.
Well, what are the implications of this proposed law for Hong Kong?
Yeah, this is an extremely dangerous proposal, which seems to basically signal the end of Hong Kong as a separate system from the mainland. Because essentially what it proposes to do is to import mainland concepts such as subversion, foreign interference, counterterrorism into Hong Kong in order to restrict Hong Kong people. And we've seen on mainland China how these same very concepts are used to clamp down very violently on any dissidents or the pro-democracy advocates. For example, subversion was exactly what was used against Nobel Peace Prize winner Liu Xiaobo, who was in prison for 11 years and then died in prison. So it's extremely concerning, and especially because they're planning to actually install mainland security agencies inside the border of Hong Kong in order to enforce these draconian laws.
Not actually just push this through.
But unfortunately, the system is designed so that Beijing actually has the final say. I mean, from a legal point of view, there's certainly problems with it. For example, one thing is that Beijing is not supposed to directly rule by decree like they're doing now, except for very restricted circumstances, which don't seem to apply here. But unfortunately, the right of ultimately interpreting what that law means, unfortunately, rests with Beijing. And they can interpret it in any way they like, including saying black is white.
Pro-democracy activists see this as an erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy. Are more protests like the one we've seen today? Are there more protests expected against this move in coming days?
It's almost certain that Beijing's move is going to ignite further protests in the city, because really with this proposed law, Hong Kongers really have their backs against the wall. Either they protest and resist now, or they wait for mainland-style restrictive laws to be imposed in a couple of months' time. So for a lot of these Hong Kongers, they will really think that there's nothing left to lose, and so take to the streets.
All right, then, legal practitioner Wilson Leung, thank you so much for joining us on The Well today.
Thank you.
Still ahead on the program. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi visits cyclone-stricken Kolkata. We'll bring you details in a moment. Stay with us. Coronavirus cases have been rising sharply in many Latin American countries, causing increasing concern to regional health authorities. The coronavirus death toll in Brazil has surpassed 20,000 after a record number of deaths in a 24-hour period. The country is the epicenter of the outbreak in Latin America and has more than 300,000 confirmed cases, the third highest in the world.
With more than 20,000 dead, Brazil now has the sixth highest number of deaths in the world from the coronavirus pandemic. And with outbreaks in Mexico, Chile and Peru, there are now fears that Latin America could be the next epicenter of the pandemic. More than 600,000 cases have been recorded in the region, and more than 30,000 people have died. This is far fewer cases and deaths than in Europe and the US, but testing is nowhere near as widespread, and experts say deaths may be underreported. Over in Asia, India has registered its biggest jump of coronavirus cases in 24 hours, with 6,000 new cases as the country loosens a nationwide lockdown. The country of 1.3 billion people has reported a total of over 118,000 confirmed cases. Here in Africa, 10 cabinet ministers in South Sudan are now confirmed to have contracted the coronavirus. The announcement comes just days after Vice President Riek Machar announced that he had tested positive alongside his wife, Defense Minister Angelina Teny. International travelers could be fined £1,000 if they fail to self-isolate for 14 days on arrival in the UK. Australia says its travelers should be exempt from the planned 2-week quarantine. And as the race for a cure continues, UK scientists are to begin testing a treatment it is hoped could counter the effects of COVID-19 in the most seriously ill. The drug involved is known to boost a patient's stock of T cells, immune cells that clear infection from the body.
Meanwhile, restrictions in Madrid and Barcelona will be eased on Monday, meaning the cities will become the final areas of Spain to come out of strict lockdown. Spain softened its restrictions for much of the country earlier this month, but the majority of rules remained in place for the Spanish capital and the second city because their outbreaks were so severe. Bars and restaurants in Madrid and Barcelona will now join the rest of the country in being allowed to reopen at half capacity from Monday, and meetings of up to 10 people will be allowed. Churches can also open again with restrictions in place, and people will be free to travel outside the cities. In other areas of Spain, restrictions will be relaxed further, with theatres, cinemas, art galleries allowed to reopen from Monday at no more than a third of capacity, and some schools will also resume. Over in Asia, millions of people across Bangladesh and eastern India are taking stock of the devastation left by Cyclone Amphan. A massive cleanup operation has begun after the storm left 84 dead and flattened homes, uprooted trees and left cities without power. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in West Bengal state today to conduct an aerial survey. Prime Minister Modi says the country stands with the people of West Bengal and announced emergency aid of 10 billion rupees to help the state at a time when it and the rest of the country are dealing with the coronavirus. Authorities in both countries had evacuated millions of people before the storm struck. COVID-19 and social distancing measures made mass evacuations more difficult, with shelters unable to be used to full capacity. The United Nations says aid workers report that war-torn Yemen's healthcare system has in effect collapsed and coronavirus is spreading through the country. Jens Lach, spokesman for the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, describes the situation as extremely alarming. The Yemeni authorities have confirmed scores of coronavirus cases and 30 deaths, but the UN says the real figures are almost certainly much higher.
We hear from many of them that Yemen is really on the brink right now. The situation is extremely alarming. They are talking about that the health system has in effect collapsed. They are talking about having to turn people away because they do not have enough oxygen. They do not have enough personal protective equipment. As I said, we are working on the assumption that there is already widespread communal transmissions going on. It is very, very critical that the international community steps up now and at the pledging conference on the 2nd of June, because we are heading towards a fiscal cliff. If we do not get the money coming in, the programs that are keeping people alive and are very much essential to fight back against COVID will have to close. And then the world will have to witness what happens in a country without a functioning health system battling COVID-19. Epidemiologists do estimate that the virus could spread faster, more widely, and with deadlier consequences in Yemen than in many other countries. We expect that, although there is, of course, an official indication reported by WHO of the number of cases, the actual incidence is almost certainly much higher.
The singer Mori Kante, who helped bring African music to world audiences with hits like Yeke Yeke, has died in Guinea at the age of 70. According to his son, his death was the result of untreated health problems. He says he suffered from chronic illnesses and often traveled to France for treatment, but that was no longer possible with the coronavirus pandemic. Born in a famous family of Broids, West African musicians and storytellers, he had been nicknamed the Electronic Broid and was known as a distinguished player of kora, a West African harp. His song Yeke Yeke became a huge hit in the late 1980s and was widely remixed. Finally on the program, wearing protective masks that match musicians' the black outfit, the Symphony Orchestra for Ukraine's public broadcaster held its first concert recording for TV, radio and online platforms after lockdown measures were partially eased earlier this month. While two musicians would normally share one music stand, members of the orchestra now follow the rule of the 2-meter social distancing, something which has an impact on the performance. Comparing the orchestra to a military unit, the orchestra's art director, Vladimir Shayko, said performing was more difficult as musicians lack physical closeness and being able to reach each other's expression, which helped them play together. Founded in 1929, the Symphony Orchestra of Ukrainian Radio belongs to state-run public broadcaster UA Suspline, which combines all Ukrainian TV channels for radio stations and a number of regional divisions and their online platforms. As the orchestra mainly creates content for radio and TV, its musicians are more protected from the impact of coronavirus restrictions than their counterparts playing for live audiences. That is some form of normalcy. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shoboale.